Good morning, everybody. This is Kiana. I hope you're having an excellent Saturday. I know that some of you are still in bed. I got up early this morning. I got some amazing sleep, and I watched that Allan Lichtman video, and I said, you know what, this video doesn't feel like it's a very quality video. There was a lot happening that evening. One, there was a problem with the microphone. Two, I had done a lot of reading, and so that video was taken late in the night. And so, there was a lot of stuff that I was thinking about and trying to compartmentalize in my mind, like what's important, what's not important. And so it just didn't come out to be a very quality video. So I'm going to be doing that video over. Also, there's a lot of things that I'm dealing with right now. As you know, I am a person who is being victimized by transnational repression. And I explain what that is in several of my videos. And you can also Google that phenomenon online and find out what it is. But within this phenomenon, there is like a typology of cyber crime. So the state is angry at me because I've been very vocal against racism and ill treatment in Ireland's direct provision institution. So the state is having cyber criminals clandestinely uh, get into my accounts, mess with my videos, having me to do those videos several times over. And so you can see, like, if I'm doing these videos over and over and over and over and over again, it can be quite exhaustive, right? And so I'm exhausted doing them. And so there's a lot that I'm dealing with. And as we know, that cybercrime is a very clandestine uh, criminal act, and it's difficult to prove. And really, heuristically, uh, not many people understand what it looks like and how it impacts the victim. And so I have been dealing with, cyber transnational cyber criminals getting into my accounts, hacking into my accounts, messing with my videos, and just doing a lot of uh, very petty uh, acts behind the scene. But that's okay because soon they are the only keyboards that they're going to be clicking from are the the keys that are on a typewriter behind a jail cell. And for those sitting at the very top, these intelligence agencies, the only thing that they're going to be investigating is whether somebody's parked in the right place, because they're going to be giving out parking tickets pretty soon. But let's go ahead and get into this video. I want to continue our conversation or our discussion about Dr. Allan Lichtman, who is a distinguished professor who predicted 9 out of 11 elections correctly. So he got one wrong in the past, and he got this election wrong, which was Vice President Kamala Harris versus Donald Trump. He predicted that Vice President Kamala Harris would win the presidency. But as we know, Donald Trump actually won. He won the popular vote and he won the electoral college vote. And he has, in my personal opinion, he is very uh, insightful and has a lot of interdisciplinary knowledge. He has specialism in predicting elections. So it raises the question as to what went wrong, right? So, what went wrong? Dr. Lichtman argues, and a lot of people say that Dr. Lichtman was biased this election. But Dr. Lichtman says, no, I'm not biased. I wasn't biased. And so what he does is he points to a lot of the predictions that he made in the past, right? So, for example, Dr. Lichtman says, how can I be biased if I predicted that Trump would win in 2016 and Reagan in 1982? He said, how can I be biased because I predicted that George Bush would be reelected and H.W. Bush would be reelected in 1988? This is diametrically opposed to, a confirmation bias, right? So he's saying, no, there's no way that I could be biased because I'm predicting all these conservative candidates. And that could be true. And he further argues that there is not an issue with the keys. But he does concede that there could be like opening up the keys in a way to which he hadn't done before. Like maybe he failed to do that. Now, i- my personal opinion is that Dr. Allan Lichtman wasn't apperceptive about this particular election. And before I get into that, I just kind of want to give you like my journey about where I started and then like where I ended up and why these elections mean so much to me. So I first started, I'm a liberal, I'm still a liberal, and I started out in Texas and I wanted to intern for my elected representatives. But when I went to my elected representatives, a lot of those positions were taken. Not only were those positions taken, but a lot of students that were coming out of high school were getting those positions. So, of course, when I would go and I would interview, what would happen is that someone that was younger than me would actually get the position, which that wasn't a problem for me. But I wanted to be very strategic about my internship. So I went to the Texas Democratic Party and asked if they would allow me to intern for them. And they said yes. And so I did start an internship with the Texas Democratic Party. It was, of course, unpaid. And what I decided was, my beliefs are more than just uh, the politics that I'm being, you know, presented in the Texas Democratic Party. Like what I think I was resonating more with Bernie Sanders' campaign, like his policy positions seemed to resonate with me, and I seemed very in sync with his message. And so I left the Texas Democratic Party and decided to, vote for Bernie Sanders. And interestingly, of course, that was during the time where Hillary Clinton was running against Donald Trump. Everyone thought that Hillary Clinton was going to win the presidency. And like I was the only person I was thinking, no, this is not going to happen. Um, I don't think that she is going to win, but everyone around me thought that she was going to win. And I was working also on Mayor Adler's task force, and it- there as well, people thought that Hillary Clinton was sure to win the presidency, but Donald Trump won. Howsoever, Hillary Clinton did win the popular vote. And so going back to Dr. Allan Lichtman, so I feel like he was not apperceptive about several of the keys. And what do I mean by that? I don't think that he actually made sense of an idea, assimilating it into the body of knowledge that was already present or available about the keys. So, for example, let's take the social unrest key. Dr. Lichtman argues that the social unrest, it needs to be like a time period. And now he quotes a specific time period. I didn't go back and look at that time period, and I can't remember exactly what time period that is, but he said it needs to be quite like that time period in the past. I think it was like during the Watergate scandal. It needs to be something like that. And I would argue no. Being apperceptive about the social unrest key, I feel that social unrest just needs to be worldwide, as we have seen with the Israeli-Palestine protest, how these protests are global and they're in each nation. And when the United Nations is involved, and speaking out about it, when the International Criminal Court is, giving their opinion on it, I feel like that is what will tilt that social unrest key. And then we had the issue of the short-term economy key. Now, Dr. Lichtman, he argues that for this key to change against the party in the White House, that it needs to be something like a recession, right? But I disagree with that, and I know that this is Dr. Lichtman's system, so he is. Uh, I guess the person who developed the system, and so he has more knowledge about the system, but interpreting the system in way citizens are being impacted by, or the way the keys are impacting the civilians in the United States. I think that what was clear to me, if it wasn't clear to anyone else, which I know that it was clear to most people, is that most Americans were speaking out about not being able to put gas in their gas tanks, not being able to put food on their table, not having enough money in their pocket. And money issues in the United States is a very important concern for Americans. And this was every time you turned on the news station, it didn't matter what broadcasting station it was. In many broadcasting stations, Americans were talking about not being able to fill up their gas tank, not being able to put money in their pockets, and not having enough food on the table to feed their families. And third, in my personal opinion, I feel like Dr. Allan Lichtman was not perceptive about the scandal key. Now, he argues that a scandal needs to impact the sitting president directly. So it can't be a family member, it can't be a friend. But if we are to be honest about the last 4 years, right? We can see that there was some opinions about President Joe Biden's mental acuity. There was also opinions about his health. There was several videos that were being published about him, or illustrating, depicting Joe Biden falling off a bike, falling down the stairs, falling on a platform. And then there was the issue with Hunter Biden and the scandal that surrounded him, which plagued Joe Biden's presidency. Furthermore, there was also the Democratic Party urging Joe Biden to step down from re-elections. And that was something that President Joe Biden did not want to do. President Joe Biden felt that he could actually win and be re-elected, but the Democratic Party, the Democratic National Convention said, no, like, we don't think that you can win. We don't think that you will be reelected. Please step down. So when we view this, of course, in its totality, we can see that there was a lot of scandals surrounding this presidency. I would even include the scandals surrounding Julian Assange in his revelation that the CIA tried to unalive him, or had planned to unalive him. And if you weren't following the headlines, and you weren't following like the protests, many protests were taking place across the United Kingdom when I don't know if this was worldwide protest, but I know that there was a lot of protest in the United Kingdom related to Julian Assange. There were protests in Belfast where Amnesty International was protesting at the US consulate office here in Belfast, and it was related to the detention of Julian Assange, where he was making claims against, or he was making an Article 3 claim. So he was saying that he was being tortured, treated cruel, and that there was unusual punishment in his detention, degrading treatment. And so there was a lot of scandal that was a black cloud over this particular presidency. And I personally don't think that Dr. Allan Lichtman was apperceptive about that. As you know, or I think I mentioned it in a couple of videos, that I used to read the tarot. And so what I've learned is that sometimes when a person is close to you, like if you're reading for somebody close to you, now I don't read the tarot anymore, but if you are reading tarot for somebody close to you, it's, for me, it's very difficult. You heard that right. It's very difficult for me to really kind of give them an accurate reading. But when I read for people that I don't know, it's easier because there's not already that information that I know about this person that's influencing the interpretation that I'm giving about what I'm seeing in the cards, right? And so I think that where Dr. Allan Lichtman went wrong in his prediction is that he didn't allow his subconscious to guide him in interpreting the keys. And I guess in a way that is new, right? That like a newfangled way, because he has a certain system down. He's used to predicting elections in a very formulated way. And so I guess any deviation from that system that he already has, as he mentions, he feels that it's a recipe for disaster, that it could impact the keys. But I think that was what was necessary. Sometimes you have to take a step back and you have to say, okay, it is with, I'll give an example for with the social unrest. Although social unrest now is not like the Watergate scandal or the period of time that Dr. Allan Lichtman mentions, is the social unrest that we are seeing today, is that enough to impact the presidency? And I think that requires putting himself in the shoes of the voter, putting himself in the shoes of uh, international leaders, putting himself in the shoes of the party holding the White House, putting himself in the shoes in the party not holding the White House, and from his own perspective as well. There's a lot to evaluate there. And so I think what was evaluated was just from the duopoly. So it was an evaluation from the lens of the duopoly, and that evaluation was inaccurate. Unfortunately, even if so, I on a side note, I think now is a perfect time for Americans who want to be outside of the duopoly to come together and to try and create a third party that's going to be strong enough to compete in upcoming elections. Now is the perfect time because Donald Trump is in office for 4 more years. And now you Americans, please hear me out. You have 4 years. I'm not in the United States, but if I were there, I'm in Europe, but if I was in the United States, I would be saying, like, we have 4 years to try and create another party that is strong enough to compete against the Democratic Party and strong enough to compete against the Republican Party. And part of creating a party, it needs to be a party that has policy positions that everybody can get on board with. Because, as you know, this election, Black Americans were advocating for reparations, and a lot of uh, Americans weren't on board with that. There were women in the United States advocating for the right to have an abortion, and then there weren't people that were on board with that. Americans were advocating for LGBTQ rights, and then a lot of Americans weren't on board with that. So there needs to be a party that is streamlined and consistent in belief system, because, as you know, with the Republican Party, and again, I'm not a Republican. I could never be a Republican because my beliefs are so diametrically opposed to the Republican Party. But we must admit that they are very organized in, of course, in how they run elections, how they compete for elections, and really their messaging. And I think that this is something that a third party, or even the Democratic Party, if it is going to stay together, it needs to learn. There's a lot in this. I think there's a lot that's in this election. This well, a lot that happened in this election that I personally feel is going to change a lot. Like, I don't think that the Democratic Party is going to be such a united party anymore. Like, there's going to be a lot of change, and I think that this election is making room for a third party to shine and and to be more visible, because United States is so polarized right now in politics. As we have seen this election, none of the third party candidates would have made an impact. So, for example, Dr. Jill Stein, she got 761,000, almost 762,000 votes. And then you had the Libertarian candidate, Dr. Cornel West Kennedy, getting less than that. And all that combined together wasn't even enough to make an impact on this election. So it wasn't enough to give uh, Kamala Harris, Vice President Kamala Harris, more votes, and to put her up there. It wasn't enough to do this. Well, of course, we know that Donald Trump won by landslide, but it wasn't enough to make an impact. Donald Trump, he got 76 million votes, and Vice President Kamala Harris got 73 million. So even if all those votes from the third party went to Kamala Harris, she still would not have beaten Donald Trump. And the question is why, right? And that's not a question for me to answer. That's a question for voters who are in disagreement with this election to really ponder on. Again, it's not something that it's not for me to talk about. In my personal opinion, I would have voted, or in my personal opinion, I feel that both parties are the same, the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. I would not have voted for either candidate. I threw my weight behind Dr. Cornel West, but Dr. Cornel West made many mistakes in his campaign, unfortunately, which we may talk about another time. But I think that if I had the opportunity to vote for Dr. Cornel West, I would have, and that would not have made an impact, as we know, because we already see that Dr. Cornel West was not on the ballot in many states. And Dr. Jill Stein was on the ballot in most states, and she unfortunately didn't get, like, she didn't rise to the level of votes that Kamala Harris had. And so a lot of people are asking, well, was the Israeli Gaza conflict that's happening, was that a deciding factor in this election? And I would say no. We know that to be true because Dr. Jill Stein was a pro-Palestinian candidate, and if Israel-Palestine conflict, if that conflict that was happening were a huge issue this election, we would have had so many people voting for Dr. Jill Stein that would have taken most votes away from um, Vice President Kamala Harris or even Donald Trump, President-elect Donald Trump, and that did not happen. So this lets you know that most Americans in the United States are, how can I say this? Let me say it this way. Most Americans in the United States are sympathetic to what is happening in Gaza. We don't want any children to be slaughtered, and we don't want any children to die. We don't want women to die. We don't want even men to die unjustly. I'm an anti-war advocate. I don't believe that there should be war on either side, but I think that most Americans in the United States um, are in solidarity with Israel. And the reason why the reason why we are in solidarity with Israel, because we have a similar, especially Black Americans, um, we have a similar history to Israel. So, for example, the Jews, suffered a horrific Holocaust and were persecuted. And Black Americans, we understand that persecution. We understand how there is a persecution, and that not being seen as a human being. We understand that clearly. And that's not to say that that's not what's happening for the Palestinian people, right? But I think that in the United States, there's been just a very strong relationship between the United States and Israel. And, United States protecting Israel, Israel protecting the United States. And then there's anti-American sentiment. So other countries within the Middle East are not liking Americans, and um, and they have their reasons, and that's not for a discussion or up for debate this time. But I think that this election shows quite clearly that most Americans are in solidarity with the United States. I think that most Black Americans are in solidarity with Israel. They may not be in solidarity with the war that's going on, but they're in solidarity with Israel as a right to defend itself. Most, most citizens are. So it's a difficult subject, and maybe we'll talk about it in another video, but this video has gone on long enough. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Pushing these videos up in the algorithm is always important. Also, we must really remember that the right to life is very important, and that we must advocate for change and call for a ceasefire. That war is never okay, no matter which side you're on. And we need to be always advocating for peace. And for that, I hope that you have a good day. Bye bye.